And good evening. We are doing it live right here on this rainy evening, Wednesday night in the big city of Los Angeles, City of Angels, in the 5 o'clock hour. This is Mottek On Money, 5 nights a week for you, live on the air right here on 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast for you at KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. It's raining. That's always big news here. Also, extra officers been called out to try to deal with that gridlock situation around the closed 10 freeway. Of course, 790 KBC keeping you posted on that big story. Meanwhile, stocks continue on a roll today, building on the previous session's big rally after that inflation number came out, a bit better than expected, boosting hopes for an economic soft landing and hopes that the Fed will cut interest rates and thus reduce borrowing costs for businesses and consumers. The Dow coming in for a closing gain today of 164 points. The S&P 500 gained 7, and the Nasdaq moved up another 9.5 points. The latest reading on inflation today at the wholesale level, the producer price index down 0.5% in October. Economists had expected a 0.1% increase. The core producer price index, which takes out food and energy prices and trade services, did move higher by 0.1% in October, down from a 0.3% gain the previous month. New readings on retail sales down 0.1% in the month of October and down for the first time in 7 months. But that decline is unlikely to last as we get into the holiday shopping season when Americans, of course, like to spend and become Santa's helpers. Economists polled by the Wall Street Journal had expected a 0.2% drop in retail sales and was the first negative reading since March. Bright spot in the retail world with Target opening the retail earnings week by delivering an unexpected third-quarter earnings result that came in better than expected. Despite declining sales, the stock has popped about 17%, almost 18% today, after Target, or Target as it's also known, reported a surprise increase in third fiscal quarter profit, beating expectations by a wide margin. SpaceX, based in Hawthorne, right here in Southern California, let's not forget that, aiming for another test flight of its mega rocket this Friday. After getting final approval from federal regulators, the first launch of the Starship ended in an explosion, you might recall, minutes after lifting off from South Texas back in April. The FAA just issued a new license today, noting that SpaceX has met safety, environmental, and other requirements to try again. Well, the hot labor summer spilling into the hot labor fall, and today voting on a tentative contract deal between General Motors and the United Auto Workers Union that ended a 6-week strike against the company appears too close to call after the latest tallies. Several GM factories were announced today. We're watching, of course, what's happening in the Middle East. Israeli troops today storming into Gaza's largest hospital, searching for traces of Hamas terrorists inside and beneath the facility. We're following that story very closely. Of course, also the price of oil very much in focus as well. Down today, make that down $1.60 to $76.66 a barrel, pulling back from recent highs. Brent crude in London, the global benchmark, moved lower by $1.29 at $81.18 a barrel. Closer to home, as you've been hearing on 790 KBC, President Biden asking China to weigh in with Iran, an urge to avoid steps that could be seen as provocative in the Middle East, according to a senior U.S. official telling reporters today after a 4-hour meeting between President Biden and the leader of China, Xi Jinping. The official said Chinese officials had engaged in discussions with Iran on regional risks. The Jerusalem Post is reporting the Israeli Defense Forces attacked Hezbollah targets in Lebanese territory today. Targets included a weapons depot, military infrastructure, observation posts, and rocket launch positions. Coming up later this hour, I'll discuss geopolitics, the economy, business, and yes, that 10 freeway closure with veteran broadcast journalist turned U.S. Senate candidate CHRISTINA PASCUCCI, who's now running for the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's U.S. Senate seat in what's turned out to be one of the nation's most competitive and closely watched Senate races. CHRISTINA PASCUCCI will be joining me live later this hour. Some good news for real estate and for people trying to afford to buy a home. Fixed-rate mortgage rates have pulled back from recent 23-year highs. We'll get an update on that tonight from Fred Solomon, president of Solomon Financial Mortgage and Realty, who will be joining me live later this hour. But first, on your money, the markets, and the economy. Joining us live now, veteran money manager Gabriel Wisdom, co-founder and managing director of American Money Management and author of Wisdom on Value Investing. Gabriel, thank you very much for taking the call here on another update for the markets. And of course, a lot of moving parts here. Give us your view of things here at the moment.
Well, Frank, we have now 91% of all the companies in the S&P 500 having reported earnings, and it's very clear that the earnings recession is in the history books. Now, we did have a earnings recession beginning in the second quarter of 2022 through the first quarter of this year, and on balance, earnings for those 500 major companies fell in the aggregate just under 8% over that time, 7.9%. That compares with significant declines in the past crises that we've had. The COVID crisis of 2008, earnings declined 33%. The financial crisis, the COVID crisis of 2020, the great 2008 recession, earnings fell some 77%. The tech wreck, earnings fell some 28% during the 2000 period. And here we are with a very mild recession reading. An earnings recession is it's basically in the box. It's over. So that's why markets rallied broadly today, led by the big major companies, the Dow Jones companies.
On the air live with Gabriel Wisdom. There are some flies in the Chardonnay, though, Gabriel. We see after hours here Cisco, the tech bellwether, slashing its revenue forecast, and shares plunging in extended hours today, down about 10%. So it's not all rainbows and ice cream cones across the board.
No, it's not. And Cisco's problem is that a lot of companies have decided to wait before they buy new equipment, build new plants for the moment. We're in the holiday season. Now, interest rates, where will they be in 2024? Will we have a recession? Mary Daly of the San Francisco Fed says, be ready for one more interest rate hike. But the market and market seers are predicting far lower interest rates. In fact, UBS strategists today came out with a deflationary forecast. They're expecting rates to fall some 4 times more than generally expected. They expect a terminal rate by early 2025 of 1.25, 1.25%. Compare that to the 5.5% rate we have now, and they're saying it's because we have a recession coming in the first or second quarter of next year. Maybe Cisco Systems is a bellwether.
Very interesting. And Kathy Wood, we heard from Kathy Wood today, who once told me she listened to this program when she lived here in Southern California. Hope to have her on sometime. The chief executive at ARK Invest said that a deflation trend has begun now, which might compel the Fed to start cutting its key interest rate. She was speaking about the latest readings on inflation that came out this week. Is the inflation genie back in the bottle now, or what do you see ahead on the inflation front?
Well, you know, Frank, Kathy Wood has become one of the thought leaders in our industry, and that ARK fund, while it's been very volatile, has also been very rewarding if it's been held over the long run. But I think what Ms. Wood is talking about, this deflationary trend, has a lot to do with technological innovation, because new tech is deflationary. Prices go down. If we're in an era of falling prices, you can blame it on artificial intelligence, robots, electric vehicles, genomic sequencing. The blockchain phenomena is deflationary. So that's all good, and it might lead to more productivity and lower prices.
And this is cute. I don't know if you saw this, but a Goldman Sachs Group strategist came out with some advice for investors thinking about tweaking their portfolios. He suggests maybe try listening to Taylor Swift instead. He said, he said all you had to do was Stay. That's, of course, one of the tracks from Swift's 1989 album. So for those that hung in there, it looks like they've benefited after all.
Well, it's true, because the American economy and capitalism has, on balance, been rewarding year in, year out with little blips. If you look at a graph of the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Averages or anything, real estate, things that we really need and we use, it's companies that we go to work for, we try to do better every day for the benefit of ourselves and our families. That graph is a large mountain that just keeps going up and up and up. But in the interim, you get peaks and valleys. So I think Goldman is right. You need a ticket. You need to get on board.
And, of course, in the past, we've seen it pays to be optimistic. Certainly just ask our parents about that. And it is the holiday season now. We got Thanksgiving coming up here. Rick Caruso at the Grove just kicked off the holiday season there this week. We got the big Beverly Hills holiday kickoff tomorrow evening. So it is the holiday season. And Target suddenly taking the spotlight here. What about the retailers here heading into the holiday shopping season?
Well, Target is another bellwether company. It's because of its size and its importance. Now, their earnings weren't as good, even though they were surprisingly wonderful. They weren't as good because of organized crime and shrinkage, and I mean, this continues to be a problem. They've closed a number of stores, including 3 in San Francisco, and they don't want to do that. But I think that the holiday season will probably be pretty good. It might even be better. The Deloitte survey showed a 17% increase in spending over last year, and now this other survey that was cited in the Wall Street Journal, you mentioned it, shows somewhat of a retraction. So nobody knows, but we do know that the Christmas season has oftentimes been a time for companies to downsize their workforces. Last year in November, for example, there was a snowball effect of layoffs at major companies like Disney and Amazon and others. And now this year alone, some 240,000 tech industry workers have been laid off. So there's some concern about the hybrid and work at home of people who refuse to come to the office. They're probably first to go.
All right, size up the retailers for us. Would you be betting on the high end, or the low end, or the middle? What are some of your favorites there?
Well, you know what? I don't like retail generally because it's so cyclical. I would say my favorite has to be Amazon because of the ease with which you can buy. And then Amazon is also using robots. They've made a climate pledge, I think it was 2019, to decarbonize their operations. And now they've put in place a new robot on the assembly line that that makes sure that the box is the right size for the item that you order. I mean, we've all had that experience if you've ordered from Amazon where you buy a small item and it comes in a big box. Well, they're solving that problem on the robot assembly line. That's deflationary as well. So I like companies that are in the retail space that are consistent year-round, not just cyclical, and Amazon would be one.
All right, Amazon, of course, among the so-called Magnificent Seven stocks, which really led this market rally. And as we wrap up 2023, certainly that was one of the big stories. Apple, Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Facebook's parent company, Tesla, NVIDIA, all of those names are part of the Magnificent Seven. What about those Magnificent Seven stocks here now?
Well, they're looking a bit soft. There's more competition for chips. Intel has a new one that Microsoft will be using. Microsoft, which is one of the Mag 7 companies, has rolled out a new chip for artificial intelligence. There's going to be more competition here. It's one of the reasons why NVIDIA was soft today, along with AMD. Some of the Mag 7 companies have just gone to unrealistic valuations, several $1 trillion of total value as a percentage of sales. That's a very high multiple. Now, the gains in those 7 companies account for about 30% of the S&P 500's performance this year. That's also unsustainable. I think a healthier trend, Frank, would be if we see a broader participation in the market. We're starting to see that. That's, in fact, what occurred today.
And certainly we're watching the...
Welcome to Talkville,
the ultimate Smallville rewatch podcast. I always drove the cars, the Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghinis. They were always a little skeptical, but sometimes they go, all right, Rosie, just go up where the stop sign is and turn the car around, and we'll give you your cue on the walkie. And I go, great. And they're like, Rosie? I'm like, yeah, dude. Oh, yeah, this stop sign? They're like, yes, there's only that stop. Oh, okay.
Jump in now or catch up on any of the past seasons of Talkville on YouTube or wherever you listen.
Price of oil, which curiously has pulled back. We have, of course, the war in the Middle East, and today the big meeting between President Biden and the Chinese leader, with the Chinese economy weakening. And and the big talks going on there in San Francisco. Here we see the price of oil back down to around 76 and change. What do you see ahead for the price of oil and all the geopolitical concerns out there at the moment?
Well, the Israel-Hamas conflict was supposed to be disruptive for energy, and it would likely see higher oil prices. And I haven't dismissed that concern. It could still occur. But what is really interesting to me is how major oil companies like Occidental, Schlumberger, SLB, and more recently here, ExxonMobil have plans to become the biggest suppliers of lithium for electric vehicles instead of China. We've been dependent on China to get lithium and the other battery metals like cobalt, nickel. There's a lot of lithium in the soil. It's just hard to mine. They've got a new direct lithium extraction model. And by the way, Exxon scientists there invented the lithium-ion battery in the 1970s. I think they know what they're doing, and this is the future for big oil.
Very interesting. And what about merger activity as the year winds up? We did have that one big merger deal in the oil patch recently. Any other merger deals coming in under the wire, you think?
No, I think the M&A departments, just like the initial public offering machines, the appetite there is not very great. And part of it has to do with interest rates. Now, if the UBS forecast is correct, and we see the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by almost 3 percentage points, which is nearly 4 times more than what markets are pricing in. If we see that, then expect a lot of merger and acquisitions activity because most of it's done with either stock or with borrowed money.
All right. It's hard to ignore the crypto space with crypto seeing a big rebound this year from that winter, that crypto deep freeze we had last year. We see Bitcoin of about 150 now, above 37, almost to 38,000. What are your thoughts about what's happening there?
Well, today, Frank, the SEC delayed their decision to approve a spot Bitcoin exchange-traded fund, which would certainly guarantee a big change for investors. They wouldn't have to worry about wallets and whether their Bitcoin is going to be stolen, and that would be huge. Now, Bitcoin, as you mentioned, has climbed up, I think, around 120% so far this year. And J.P. Morgan, I saw today, their strategist said that this rally in the crypto market is, they said, rather overdone. But it's absolutely for real. And let's face it, and there's a halving event coming up here when the stock splits, basically the token, and this reduces rewards for mining Bitcoin by half, and it pushes the token to record highs if the last 3 halving events are any indication. So that may be behind the rise in Bitcoin and other cryptos.
All right, before I let you off the hook, any other specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, frankly, when we talked about Target and the retail crime situation, the shrinkage, I like the cybersecurity space and the basic security area. There's a VanEck semiconductor ETF that I've been looking at, symbol SMH. I may like the iShares cybersecurity and tech ETF. The symbol is IHAK, IHAK. And then the worst performing industries this year are among my favorites for 2024. Agriculture is at the top of the list. Biotechnology, which has been very soft. We saw the banks perform rather nicely today. Banks and then finally solar companies have been extremely soft this year.
Gabriel Wisdom, co-founder and managing director at American Money Management, based here in Southern California, author of Wisdom on Value Investing. Gabriel, thank you very much for taking the call here tonight.
Thank you, Frank.
790 KBC welcomes Chicago with, yep, you guessed it, Earth, Wind, and Fire, coming to the Kia Forum September 6th. Tickets on sale this Friday at Ticketmaster.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-790-5222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call right now, 1-888-790-5222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Well, we can groove tonight with the Dow up 163 points at the closing bell, extending this week's rally. We're back to 34,991. The S&P 500 of 7 at 4503, and the NASDAQ up 9 at 14,104. The NASDAQ exited correction territory this week. That is rebounding from the recent 10% pullback from its most recent high. The yield in the 10-year note, which impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates, have also been easing lately. Bond yields have been easing, and we'll talk about that later this hour with our mortgage expert here this evening, taking a look at the yield in the 10-year, which impacts those fixed-rate mortgage rates down to 4.51%. It had popped above 5% recently, sending mortgage rates to 23-year highs. Taking a look at the crypto world, it turns out Bitcoin is up just about 130% since the start of the year, up about $150 now at $37,773. Ethereum up 7 at $2,056, and Doge at 7 cents. The price of oil today hovering a bit lower, down $1.60 to $76.66 a barrel. We're looking at regular gas in Los Angeles, still up there at $5.14, $5.51. The average price for premium and diesel actually moving higher in the last 24 hours at $6.04 a gallon. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Turning now to geopolitics. Israeli troops today storming into Gaza's largest hospital, searching for traces of Hamas terrorists inside and beneath the facility. The war continues between Israel and Hamas, which erupted after the militant group killed some 1,200 people and seized about 240 hostages back on October 7th in an attack that has shattered Israelis' sense of security. Meanwhile, in San Francisco this evening, President Biden meeting with the Chinese leader. They just held a news conference. President Biden saying the U.S. and China are restarting cooperation to, among other things, reduce the amount of fentanyl shipped directly from China into the United States, which initially saw some progress made in 2019. He also said following the summit that the two countries are resuming military-to-military talks, which are intended to prevent unintentional conflict. According to the Jerusalem Post, President Biden has asked China to weigh in with Iran and urge it to avoid steps that could be seen as provocative in the Middle East, according to a senior U.S. official telling reporters after a 4-hour meeting between President Biden and China's president. Joining us live now to discuss all this, veteran broadcast journalist turned U.S. Senate candidate CHRISTINA Pascucci, who is running for the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's U.S. Senate seat in what's turned out to be one of the nation's most competitive and closely watched U.S. Senate races. CHRISTINA Pascucci, thank you very much for taking the call here. And let's start with what's happening in the Bay Area. Give us your reaction to this big summit and some of the big takeaways we're learning now.
Oh, well, I mean, of course, that's of the utmost importance. It's good to be with you tonight, Frank. President Xi was saying that planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed. I thought that was a really interesting comment considering, my belief is that China wants to overtake America as the world power, but he insisted no plans to surpass or unseat the United States. And he reiterated the United States should not scheme, as he said in his words, to suppress or contain China. Very interesting wording. What was great that came out of this and hopefully will prove to actually take us in a right positive direction was the steps to curb fentanyl production. California's opioid deaths increased 121% in 3 years, and the CDC named fentanyl as a leading cause of death for American adults 18 to 49. And China believes to be responsible for more than 90% of the illicit fentanyl found in the U.S. So all of this incredibly important. Also interesting, as you just mentioned, to hear President Biden looking to China to help alleviate the rising tensions in the Middle East, which is of the utmost importance, and asking China to lean on Iran to avoid steps that would aggravate that tense situation there. What I did not hear him mention, much of at least, was Taiwan. And so I'll be curious to see how much of this meeting was political posturing, but a lot of what's coming out in the response to it has seemed to be positive thus far.
On the Air Live.
Half redneck, half posh. 100% fun. Trey Crowder and Corey Ryan Forrester try and learn fancy culture in Putting On Airs.
The host of the Medium Popcorn Podcast, Brandon Collins and Justin Brown.
Okay, so Paddington 2 had like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes
As
for
it
you.
should. You guys ruined that?
Justin came in and took it down 2 points because of his rating. That's the time we started getting death threats.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I didn't know. People worship that movie.
Putting On Airs. The podcast is on YouTube and wherever you listen.
LASIK Plus has more 5-star reviews than anyone else, which has a lot to do with our doctors. Dr. Neil Wills, named Top Doctor by Washington Magazine, has performed over 100,000 LASIK procedures. So book your appointment at LASIK Plus today and get $1,000 off their Wavelight laser when treated in November. That's $500 off per eye with financing. Visit lpoffer.com. Must mention this promotion and be treated in November of 2023 to qualify. $1,000 off for both eyes on standard Wavelight price. $500 off for one eye. Cannot be combined with any other offers. Go to lpoffer.com for details.
With Christina Pascucci, candidate for the U.S. Senate, looking to take the seat previously occupied by the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. And Christina, following the October 7th attack on Israel, you actually went to Israel. Tell us about your recent trip there.
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I embedded with 30 Chabad rabbis and myself. It was quite an experience, a very powerful experience to be there with them. And it was a fact-finding and philanthropic mission. We went throughout the entire country. We went to some of the areas that Hamas targeted immediately. We saw the remnants of what was there, had firsthand accounts. It was very painful to witness that. And went to the Western Wall, just seeing and feeling the pain. It was palpable. There was a few red alerts when we were there. We had to get down on the ground as the Iron Dome intercepted a few of the missiles above our heads. So, it's a very painful situation, but it was illuminating to say the least. I also arranged for a meeting between Palestinians and the Chabad rabbi, and hearing that discussion, it was tense, but an important one to have.
We're speaking just a day after that enormous show of support for Israel in Washington. We spoke to Rabbi Marvin Heyer on this program last evening from the Simon Wiesenthal Center and Museum of Tolerance following that big demonstration of support for Israel, the biggest ever seen there. And it was mentioned during that demonstration that calls for a ceasefire are outrageous. That was what the new House Speaker told the crowd there. And, of course, everyone cheered. What about the situation there, since you have eyes on the ground there, having just been there? What do you think is necessary at this point? What does Israel have to do to protect itself?
Well, Israel is fighting two wars in a sense, not only the war against Hamas, a group that said they want to eradicate Jews, but perhaps an equally challenging war is the information and disinformation warfare being waged. There is so much bad information, and as journalists, we've seen this throughout our careers, but it's probably the worst I've ever seen it. And today, everyone thinks they're a journalist on social media. There was an MIT study that said false stories are 70% more likely to be shared. So I think an action that lawmakers need to tackle, not only for this war, but for future elections and world conflicts, is combating the spread of misinformation and the rise of AI, because it's becoming more and more realistic and more dangerous, and the stakes are getting higher.
And in addition to having been to Israel following the October 7th attack, you also attended the screening of that documentary, which showed those horrific crimes against Israeli citizens that happened back on October 7th. That screening occurred at the Museum of Tolerance last week. Tell us what you saw there, and then we had that scuffle outside the museum. Tell us what you experienced last week. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was with Rabbi Heyer there, too. And I don't know if he talked to you about that yesterday, but wow, I mean, to see, I had met with the families of hostages and heard a lot of the stories, but to see firsthand, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The atrocities that occurred that day and how they've been minimized is so painful for the Jewish community, as if their lives didn't matter. And, you see the Hamas fighter who is so proud of all the Jews he killed. In the video, he calls his mother and father and says, your son is a hero. I killed 10 Jews with my own hands. And meanwhile, you can hear outside of the Museum of Tolerance, which is supposed to educate people about the Holocaust, you hear people shouting anti-Semitic slurs, and there's, the fighting that transpired outside. And it's just, I understand the calls to protect innocent civilians, but at that place, at that time, and what about the Jewish lives? There's just, we need to value and rediscover our humanity.
We're on the air live with Christina Pascucci, U.S. Senate candidate. And Christina, while we have you on the line here on this business news program, certainly the economy and business, you're also focused on that tremendously, having attended all of the big business conferences here locally. Finally, inflation seems to be easing, and we've had a rally in the stock market. What would you do to turn California's economy around?
Okay, where to start with that? Well, I think there needs to be a completely different approach than the approach that we have taken in recent years, where the answer seems to be tax, and increase the taxes. It is really difficult for small businesses to survive as is without adding extra tax and regulation. I would look at doing things to spur the economy and spur innovation and support small businesses. For example, providing tax incentives for them to give, perhaps their lowest wage workers childcare or transportation or things like that. So it's a win-win for both the small businesses and the workers who keep those businesses running. I think we need to take on a different approach than we have with the exorbitant taxing in California. It's really hurting a lot of people, and that's one of the main concerns I've heard from voters I've spoken to across the state.
Christina, thank you very much for taking the call tonight. Wish we had more time, but hopefully have many more conversations as we approach Election Day. That is U.S. Senate candidate Christina Pascucci, veteran broadcast journalist turned U.S. Senate candidate Christina Pascucci, who's running for the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's U.S. Senate seat here in California. She's facing Democrats Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, and former L.A. Dodgers baseball all-star Republican Steve Garvey. Christina, thank you very much for joining us here tonight, live on Mottek On Money on 790 KABC.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Folks, people like you and me have our ear to the ground on all things business. We like to be informed and well prepared. And as important as finance is, I want you to have a plan in case you're hit by someone not paying attention to the road. Thinking ahead serves us well. And even still, we can get caught off guard as people are so focused on their destination that they might not have a plan if they're in an accident that's not their fault. That's why I encourage you to put my friend, Attorney Clark Fielding's number in your phone right now. 833-88-SHARK is the number. So if you're hurt in an accident, you'll be ready to with your strategy to make Clark Fielding your first call. Fielding Law aims for the highest possible settlements, considering you might need long-term care, rehab, compensation for lost wages, and any ongoing physical or emotional pain. So if you're hurt in any kind of accident, call for a free consultation with Fielding Law, and you can trust them. They're honest, respected, and your strategy in case you get into that unexpected accident, be it motorcycle, truck, pedestrian, scooter, hit and run, boating, or bicycle accidents, you name it. Call 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK. Or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. Good evening. Well, finally, some good news. If you're looking to buy a place, mortgage rates have finally come down from 23-year highs as those benchmark bond yields have pulled back. Let's bring in the expert now on that, Fred Solomon, president of Solomon Financial Mortgage and Realty here in Southern California. Fred, thank you very much for taking the call. And first of all, give us an update on how the rates are looking here this evening.
Hey, thanks, Frank, for having me. The rates have come down 0.75% in the last 3 weeks. And the real kicker was the inflation data, coming in at 3.2% year over year from the previous month of 3.7%, which was the largest drop since COVID. So that was a real positive sign. And what it does, it makes the phone start ringing again. And on a $500,000 loan, if you drop the payment 0.75%, it's approximately $300 a month in payment. But historically speaking, if we're comparing it to the end of 2021, we're still about 4.5% higher.
On there live with Fred Solomon with Solomon Financial Mortgage and Realty. And Fred, let me ask you this. Back in the day when mortgage rates were even higher than they are now, we had something called assumable mortgages. Is that a thing now at all where people could assume the low rates that people had locked in and get the real estate business moving again?
That's an awesome question, and that is I used to have a radio program on KBC myself on Saturdays, and that is one of the things that we would talk about, creative-type financing. That would be called subject to the existing financing. There's some risks associated with that for people that have conventional loans. For people that have FHA loans, believe it or not, they are assumable. And for VA loans, they are also assumable. If a veteran sells to another veteran, they can buy it with no money down. And if a veteran sells to the general public like me and you, then they would lose their VA ability to buy another home at zero money down. But the person that buys their home can do that and assume that interest rate. So that is an excellent question, Frank, and not a lot of people in my industry understand what subject to is, and they don't understand that FHA loans are assumable, and they really don't even know that VA loans are assumable as well. And those are very and I tell people, all you got to do is look for people that want to sell their homes that refinanced anywhere between 2020 to the end of 2021. They probably have rates in the 2s and 3s, and you can assume those rates. That's very smart.
Well, thank you for being so well prepared for that answer, which is great. And I didn't know most of what you just mentioned there, so that is very, very informative on that very important subject. And, of course, it makes too much sense that we would be talking about assumable mortgages. What about adjustable mortgages? Given the rate hikes that the Fed has imposed, we've seen that that short-term rate move up, and adjustables have also ticked higher. Are adjustables completely out of fashion at this point?
Well, and you've asked me this question before, and I'm going to give you the same answer that I've given before, and that is I don't personally agree with them, simply because when you can do a zero-cost 30-year fixed mortgage, and when the rates come down and you can refi that mortgage without paying anything to do it, that has the same benefit that an adjustable rate mortgage does. And when I say that, because an adjustable rate, when the rates come down, you get the lower rate. That's how adjustable rates work. On a fixed rate, if the rates come down, you got to refinance again. However, as long as it doesn't cost you anything to do it, it's the same benefit as an adjustable. Yes, adjustables, yes, we're still experiencing an inverted yield. Well, actually, we're not experiencing an inverted yield curve because the yields are down to 4.47, and the yield on the short term it's 5%. So we just came out of an inverted yield curve, but that wasn't that way 3 weeks ago. So to me, I stay away from adjustables. I don't want to be put into a program that if the rates change in 5 or 7 years and you lock in for 5 or 7 years and the rates go up 2 percentage points and then housing prices have come down in 5 or 7 years, now you're stuck with a higher mortgage payment and the value of your property has dropped. That's what happened in 2008, and that's what caused the problem last time. So I'm not a fan.
All right. Where do you think rates are going now, and where do you see home prices go here in Southern California?
Another excellent question. I have what's called RPR data, and what RPR and 0.1% of anybody in my industry even knows what I'm going to talk about right now. And what RPR is it's a data source that us realtors have access to on our MLSs. And it tells you, I was playing around with it today, and I put a Facebook post on this exact topic today. And what it does is that it allows you to find out what's going on in your city, and then you can actually pin it down to a specific neighborhood. And it will tell you what the days on the market are, what's happening to prices, what's the list price to the sell price, what the percentage is. It will tell you all the important information us realtors need to share with our sellers, and it's very detailed, and it does analytics, and it compares it to previous times. So to answer your question, the market is stronger when the interest rates come down.
All right, Fred. Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive update tonight. Fred Solomon, president of Solomon Financial Mortgage and Realty, live with us here tonight on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Royal Oaks. Straight ahead, right here.
Welcome to Talkville, the ultimate Smallville rewatch podcast. I always drove the cars, the Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghinis. They were always a little skeptical, but sometimes they go, all right, Rosie, just go up where the stop sign is and turn the car around, and we'll give you your cue on the walkie. And I go, great. And they're like, Rosie? I'm like, yeah, dude. Oh, yeah, this stop sign? They're like, yes, there's only that stop. Oh, okay.
Jump in now or catch up on any of the past seasons of Talkville on YouTube or wherever you listen.